Imagine a universe where humanity has finally escaped Earth and spread throughout the solar system. There's no countries, no borders. There's only the society and the planets and moons that humanity has since colonized. There's an order to this society, but that order comes at a cost. Humanity has been segmented. They've been broken across into social hierarchies that have been enforced by military might and genetic modification on an extreme scale. The society is efficient in this order, suffocating in its efficiency. There is a pyramid of power where those at the top rule and those at the bottom suffer in their servitude. This is the universe that Red Rising takes place in. This is a story about the human spirit and what it will do to break free from the chains of this society. Hi, welcome back to my channel. It's been a minute, but we're back to making videos. My name is Sean, and today we're going to be talking about the Red Rising Trilogy, books 1 through 3 to include Red Rising, Golden Sun, and Morning Star. I am going to be getting into spoilers with this. I will try to mark the sections before we get there, but to start out with, I want to talk about why I really like this series. So Red Rising Book 1, I did a review on this previously. I thought it was rough but had a lot of potential. I had the foresight of having read the series before reviewing it, so I knew it was going to get better, but when I first read it, I thought it was entertaining but okay. But something cool happens as the series goes on, and that's Pierce Brown gets a lot better really quickly. So the book goes from like mildly entertaining, kind of derivative of other book genres, as such as like the dystopian YA series. You saw a lot of Hunger Games, saw a lot of Ender's Game in there. You had that battle royale dystopian with super smart kids going around doing stuff. There's a heavily leaning on that genre, and I don't think on its own Red Rising Book 1 really stands as anything special. It's entertaining, the writing was good, the prose was good, but it wasn't original. But then Book 2 happened, and the world suddenly exploded open. Pierce Brown had laid a lot of groundwork with the society, some of the reasoning in Book 1, but in Book 1 he just kind of really narrowed, focused on just like such a small part of that universe he started to build. And then Book 2 just exploded it open. It went from like a battle royale Hunger Games type book to, a giant space opera with real heavy grimdark connotations. And I absolutely love grimdark. And that's part of the reason why I really enjoyed this series. I really like the grimdark genre. When you're in such a world where death begets death begets death, and things are exploding, and you don't know what characters are going to live or die, all of a sudden all the characters that you like, you really attach to. Because there is no plot armor, there's no, hey, this guy's close to the main character or is a main character. That really doesn't mean a lot in this universe. Characters can come and go, you can become attached to them, and they can be taken away at a whim. So you're kind of left in this state of tension and panic because you start out with like, oh, there's no way he's going to kill this character. This character is awesome, like what's going to happen? And then it just gets taken away. And you're like, oh shit, is this going to happen again? And it does happen again. And you have these characters and these relationships that are really strong and enjoyable to go to, but then they get turned on each other, or they get turned against each other. And so you're constantly having people that you're rooting for on one side become the enemies on the next side. And it becomes a really cool dance of politic and intrigue. And when you start to feel the rapport of those shared victories and stuff, the author will just come in, swoop in, and take it away. You start to grow to love these characters, and then they'll be brutally and without warning taken away from you. So, before we go into more detail, just a quick heads up, we are going to be getting into some spoilers. So I'm not going to give any major plot points away, but I do want to talk about some of the characters, allude to some of the world context, use the lore to tie things in. So if you want to experience this whole story fresh, then stop watching, go pick up the book, and then come back. But warning aside, let's go ahead and talk about the society. So a lot of detail went into building the society and the colors and sort of the hierarchies that are around there, and I think that's really cool. It gives you a lot of spots to dig into and for fans to kind of talk about or suppose these hypotheticals. It's always fun when you have that extra kind of lore that you can use to dig around and sort of throw kind of crazy hypotheticals are. If you have ever seen Brandon Sanderson answer a Q&A, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But Red Rising, society is divided out into a pyramid of different colors. with golds at the top and reds pretty much at the bottom. The pyramid is split by high color, mid color, low color, where the low colors are closer to the blue collar manual laborers. The mid colors are the police and military, and you're looking at more of the engineers, doctors, those type of deals, and people that are like white collar, keeping society going. And the high colors are the people in charge. So you have your religious ceremony people, you have your bureaucrats, the people running the money, the business people, and then at the very tippy top of all of that, you have the golds. The golds are the people who are actually running the society. They were originally the people who went out into space to colonize and shepherd humanity out into a new cosmos, but they decided that they were going to shepherd humanity into something a bit different. And the general gold, just to give you some backstory lore, a couple years ago there was a strongman named Thor Hapserson. You know him as the Mountain from Game of Thrones. He broke the world record deadlifting over 1,000 pounds. Pierce Brown had said that the average Peerless Guard, which is a subset of the golds who had graduated from a special academy, kind of the best of the best golds, the average one of those would have been able to do that world record deadlift with ease. So generally you're looking at these massive Goliaths that are like 7 feet tall, just absolutely like muscular, really strong, really dense bones, and generally just from years of breeding and the upbringing and everything, you are looking at a lot of severely intelligent things. If you contrast that with what's at the bottom pyramid, which is where we spend a lot of time, you have the Reds. The Reds were based off of the Irish Plight back in the 18th century. So they are the miners of the society. We have this giant spacefaring civilization, and the entire thing is running off of helium-3. That's what fuels the ships, that's what keeps the society going and allows the interplanetary travel. So we have to have someone who's constantly mining that and keeping the society lubricated. So there are massive amounts of money involved with keeping that around, and the Reds drew the short end of the stick, and they're the ones who are underneath the planet's cores and in the asteroid belts, just mining all the helium-3 they can go and to keep it going. They are constantly underground, underfed. They are pretty similar culture to the 18th century migrant Irish workers, and they absolutely have the short end of the stick. There are some subtle ways that the manipulation happens. For example, let's say that you did something bad enough to piss off the golds and people in charge. But one of the common punishments for that, or execution styles, was that you get hung. And there's a thing that happens when you're on Mars or the moon, then the gravity is much less. So they will allow you to pull the feet of your loved one, so that way they could actually snap their neck and they're not just prolonging the suffering, because without the gravity, then the strangling that would happen from a hanging would take much longer. And it's these type of insidious controls that they have instilled throughout the entire society. I'm not going to go through every single color, but some of the really nefarious ones is you have the pinks. They're basically the sex workers of the society. They do something truly horrific where they are raised in these gardens. They have these pain implants put in their head, so their entire life they have a constant pain sort of pulsating and going, and whenever they hit a certain age where they can actually start like serving their masters, they remove the pain, so then it's almost like, oh, I finally like met the person I'm supposed to serve, and suddenly all the pain went away. However, later on you find out that none of these controls are truly perfect. Pinks have some of the highest suicide rates out of all the colors, and there are little bits like this set throughout everything. They have a low color class that's kind of the warriors of the society outside of the golds, called the Obsidians. They are these truly massive things that are much bigger than the golds and truly dangerous. And early on in society there was actually an issue where the Obsidian decided they didn't like being the golds enforcers and decided to throw the Dark Revolt, which was a revolution, and they were the only ones truly able to come close to overthrowing the golds. So what they wound up doing was stripping them of their history, giving them the Norse religion modified, and doing things like, hey, you can't use technology, touching people is bad, you only can touch you if you're going to reproduce or have sex or in these in battle. So they have these really kind of twisted controls going in there. And I mention all of these just to show that you have all these colors that are separated, but it's not a perfect system. It's not in control. There are these little tiny things, social, cultural, or militarily enforced things that try to keep people like in their place. And even with the golds, they're not actually exempt from a lot of this. They have a board of quality control where if they don't like you, or you don't meet the exacting standard of what a gold should be, or if there's some political intrigue, then you can be sent off to the academy to basically be culled. So the society has grown into this thing that, yes, the golds are at the top of it controlling it, but the society is something separate from them. It is this uncaring giant machine that prioritizes stability over everything else. There's no progress, there's no real advancement, there's no continuous exploration of space. We want to keep everything stuck in this type of position where humanity can exist for an extended amount of time. And you find that everything's stuck. There's no progress, there's no advancement. Humanity has stalled. We have explored the solar system, we have colonized all the planets inside the solar system, but there is no major advancements that have truly happened. And you see this in the culture they've created. There are cyclic where they try to find glory back in the past. The golds are holding into the old standards back in the day. Before the generation of which the story takes place, they used to have toga parties, and everyone was named based off the Greek and Romans, and their entire culture was all kind of based around the culture of the Greeks and Romans because they're trying to relive humanity's heydays. In the current batch of people, it's closer to the 18th century Prussians. There are duels for honor. They have the dueling scars. Everyone has these high-collared, old-school jackets that you'd find in an Alexander Dumas novel. And for a 700 years past society, the fact that they're having to go back and relive the glory days of Earth rather than make something new says something truly profound about that. And so I wanted to give some of that context to truly understand some of the chains that are being set up. And there is a bit of nobility in some of this. The Reds, for example, don't actually know that they are slaves. They think they have been sent way ahead of humanity, and they're trying to pave the way for future colonists. So yes, they're mining, yes, they're in terrible conditions, but they're doing something truly noble by being out there and suffering. They are paving the way for the rest of humanity to escape a doomed Earth. So there's something truly beautiful in that. And they have different versions of this for everybody. But I really just wanted to illustrate how insidious this truly is. As you go through each of the different colors, there are always things that bind them together and pit them against each other, and no one's exempt. The society is the pyramid which everyone is supposed to live under, and under ideal circumstances, you have the leader of it, the sovereign, who is also underneath that said thing. One of the main catalysts for the book is what happens when the person in charge of the society thinks that they're above it and that the rules don't apply to it. And for here, it started a slow decay of corruption where what the original standards of stability that were applied to keep everything banded, where they started to have some cracks running in through it, which set us up for what would happen next. So there is a lot more to the society than what I'm saying. Each color has generally a prestige class. There's a lot more history and detail that we can go in there, but really I just wanted to give you a glimpse and an overview of the sinister machine that it actually is, and to kind of paint a little bit of the backdrop. Because while this is very cool and there's a lot of cool details that you can find within there, different debates to have, and a lot of thought went into actually how the colors were segmented and the things that they did to actually keep them segmented, where the story actually shines to me is the characters, specifically the character development. And I wanted to talk a bit about the main character. So let's talk about the main character, Darrow. Darrow is one of my favorite characters of all time. The character growth he shows through the series is one of the best I've ever seen. The only one I can think of off the top of my head that really tops it would be Harry Dresden and the Dresden Files. But Jim Butcher, the guy who wrote it, had so far about 20 books to really build him up to that point. And what Pierce Brown has been able to do in 3 books is really crazy and miraculous. So this is a spoiler, but it's something that happens early enough in the first book that I think it's fine to mention. But one of the major drivers of the plot is that the terrorist group, the Sons of Ares, they find potential in Darrow, and through the circumstances of his wife dying, they decide that he's actually the perfect candidate to do a infiltration mission. So they have a carver, which is kind of like a human modifier, a genetic engineer. And so they take this lowly red who is very smart and has potential and transforms him into a gold. They modify his body, they put on weight, they train him in the politics and lore of the society, and basically they implant, an imposter into the society and try to get him up into the upper echelons where then they have more control over what's actually happening inside the society. And this sets up a really cool emotional journey. Darrow is by himself. There's never been someone else that has had the same sort of procedure in there that he knows of. And he's just dropped in the middle of a pack of wolves, and he is the sole imposter. So he's making these friendships, making these decisions, and, the entire time in the back of his head, he's just like, I don't actually belong here. And the pressure that puts in there really shows on Darrow. The entire time you really feel that fear and that kind of desperation that happens when there's no one you can actually open up to. He's truly on his own in a pack of wolves just trying to survive and not let everyone else know that he's not one of them. And you go from that journey where you're an isolationist terrorist and you watch him grow. You see how he learns how to trust people, how he converts people to his cause, and learns how he doesn't have to shoulder the entire burden. And you watch him grow as a leader because of that. So just the entire journey and the joy is just really awesome. And the side characters and other characters in the book are also just as beautifully written. So really it's like you have this amazing ensemble created, and you get to see the joy that's created when you share it with others. Darrow by himself couldn't have done what he did in the book. It wasn't until that Darrow learned how to accept, the fact that he had to work with other people and really just spread out his thought process and all this, that you truly saw him grow and become a really, really cool character. So speaking of the cast of characters, Pierce Brown did a fantastic job really building out the camaraderie, the rapport, and really just kind of creating a group where, you really feel like you're a part of it when you're reading it. Some of the side characters are amazing, and you get set up with these bonds that you think are going to last forever. And Pierce Brown does some twisted things with them. So you'll be rooting for one character at 1 second, really enjoying, wondering how this is going to pan out, only to have that character turn into someone who is now an antagonist and working against Darrow and, the good guy's best interests. And the motivations that they set up for each of these characters that do turn or that are set up against Darrow are really well done. So at no point you're going oh, why is this happening? It's all logical, it all makes sense, and it's wow, this was a really tough situation, and now you get to watch it just completely blow out. But in these cast of side characters, there are some really distinct personalities. Each one is very distinctly their own. They have their own voices where, if you're doing the dialogue test, where you just read through the different dialogue without actually looking at the tags of who said what, it's very easy to pick out who has their own voice, which character is which, because they are very well written and very much their own characters, which I enjoy. I've seen too many people when they're writing smart, quippy characters, or, they have too much of their own personality injected into the work, that you could have enjoyable, fun characters to read about, but they all blend together because it's all kind of the author's narrated voice more than anything. In this case, you're able to get really stark contrasts of tone, and it really blends together well. And this ensemble is cool because, one of the main lessons Darrow has to learn, and one of the big themes of the story is finding joy in others. You could be going through some extremely dark times, have these almost insurmountable tasks, and just these really things that shouldn't be able to happen, but it's not until that you can trust in your friends around you and rely on others and find joy in those others that you're actually able to make things happen. As good as any one person can be, it's never going to be as good as having a full group of people all working towards the same goal and sharing those same values. But it's in these character moments that I think the series really shines. And there's a lot of quiet moments where you reflect on just the absolute craziness of some of these scenes that are happening. The conflict written in this book is really amazing and high-paced, but then you're left with the aftermath of it. And it's through that camaraderie and that vulnerability with your friends and others that I think this series really shines. It's well done. I enjoy it. The characters are very memorable, and It's rare to see that. It's rare to see like a really good plot driven thing that has that level of characterization. So this ability to create really compelling characters and rapport and everything, I think that really translates into what Pierce Brown is probably the most excellent at, and that is creating his villains. Too often I see authors create a really cool concept of a villain, give it mystique, mystery, and then completely ruin the image of that villain by getting too familiar. Where as you start to learn his motivations and goals, or actually have them interact with the characters, the actual coolness and fear that the villain could aspire, or whatever gravitas he has, just completely gets stripped away because they become too familiar. There are a few major villains that are in the series that are set up as villains from day one and continue to be villains through the very end of it. And even with the constant exposure that you get with some of them, they never really lose that gravitas or that mystique. As you learn more about them, the more weirded out you are by them. And you're having some of these personify some of the evils or the themes that are actually set in the story. But one of the best examples of this, I think, is the Jackal. The Jackal was set up, I believe, as a counterpoint to Darrow. An absolute genius, smarter than almost all the other characters. But he really lacks that humanity and that ability to truly connect with others or to have those human experiences. So he's presented as a counterpart to Darrow. While Darrow finds strength in his friends and, the joy of the others and is able to rely on others to achieve his plans, the Jackal does none of that. He lacks whatever it is to actually make human connection, but he can fake it. God damn it, in these fakings, he is a real creepy bastard. There's one scene later on in the books where Darrow's observing the Jackal talking to his subordinates, and he's realized that he's mimicking what he's seen in Darrow, Augustus, some of the more famous people in there, and he's all taking these bits and pieces that he's seeing that's working with others and creating a cult-like following with this. So he's just creepily adapting and absolutely ruthless. And watching the growth of Darrow and how he's learning to more and more trust others and become more human, you're watching the Jackal take this dark arc of the same thing. And the more you interact with them, the more warnings, the more creeped out you are, where it's just like you're watching a snake slowly slither towards you. You're just getting more and more uncomfortable as the series goes on. And, at some point you'll be like, oh, is this guy really that bad? Because he's such a good actor. And then they'll remove the mask for a second, show the monster, and actually be like, oh no, he's worse than I thought. And some of the other villains, they humanize them for a bit, but they still show why they're just ruthless, terrible people. But, they manage to walk that tightrope where you can humanize a villain while still keeping them firmly in the place of a villain. There's a lot of times where I think that line just isn't really well maintained, and you just wind up either seeing the monster in the horror film where you're like, oh, this is actually pretty cheesy and it's just lost all mystique, or you make the character too relatable where you're like, oh, well, that guy actually is, not wrong. Or other times you'll see a villain and they'll make him really relatable, logical, but then they're not consistent with that. So you see, they have to do certain things because the plot needs them to do certain things to go through there, rather than organic kind of growth. With some of the guys in there, you're like, wow, these are really terrible things, and I can see you're actually a pretty twisted dude, but in that twisted there is some sort of nobility where it's I can see how you got there. And a common question that gets raised in there was, would I be different if I was raised in that circumstance? And a lot of times the answer is I think I might actually be worth if it wasn't for, the others keeping me on track and telling me to live for more. So to wrap all of this up, I really like Pierce Brown's writing. I think the writing in prose shines in the very first book. The world building really explodes out in books 2 and 3 and becomes something awesome. Book 1 is a little too derivative, and the characters, the villains, the plot forward, the conflict, books 2 and 3 are those type of books that you read them in a day because you just can't put them down. I didn't mention this earlier in the video, but if you have the extra time, I actually highly recommend listening it to on Audible. The guy who narrates it does an excellent job. The accents, everything, he really sells it, and it is quite a performance. I actually got halfway through each of the books trying to read them because I can read faster than I can listen, only to feel man, I'm missing out on this guy's performance. Let me actually put this back on there or read along with the book because it's just really excellent and one of the better audio performances I've seen. And I think the reason I really enjoy this series is in large part because of the themes and character growth. You have a character that thinks he knows everything and is very arrogant and very smart and capable, and you throw him in impossible situations where he is doomed to fail. And he does fail. And through that failure and the scars he gets from battle and just the sheer unfairness of life in the world and this giant machine-like system that's keeping humanity down and where you feel trapped in the system, he, through the perseverance and through the bonds he creates with others and just living for a dream of someone else or for something more, he's able to overcome everything and then grow and become someone who's actually able to lead people out of that hellhole and into a stronger place. And I think a lot of times today in society, there's the 9-to-5 traps. There's the, hey, I know exactly what I have to do with my life because society's dictated that this is what I'm supposed to do. That in real life, it's really easy to feel like you're stuck in these ruts. And that, if you're doing it by yourself, you just have this giant machines of oppression or societal expectation or the expectation of others that keep you in a certain spot locked in. And that can be extremely suffocating. I know myself, I have a very strong wanderlust sense, so the amount of times I've had to say, no, don't just quit everything and go run off to Portugal and backpack through the world because that's great for a few years, but then you're not going to have any money has been overwhelming at some points. And knowing that you can work together with your friends and create a tribe of people that you can all strive for stuff better together, it's very comforting, and I found a lot of relatability in the series. And it was a fun read. I mean, with everything else aside, maybe you're not on that same wavelength or these aren't things that bother you. And if they aren't, then the plot's fun. You go through it fast. It's conflict. There's a lot of ups and downs, and it's just very well written. But, as the future goes on and you're seeing more and more of these weird societal traps and expectations that are going on where more and more life technology is coming in and putting these weird expectations on us or wrapping us up in these weird things where you're getting less and less separation of, work and home life. And I remember growing up where, in order to hang out with someone, you had to walk over to their house, knock on the door, and then you just organically hung out. Now it's just, you're seeing technology do all these weird things. And at the heart of it, Red Rising, the series, is about what happens when technology goes too far to a certain extent. And so watching the extremes of that and seeing how the human spirit can still break out of that was very satisfying to watch. But hopefully you liked it. Sorry that this took so long to come out. I really wanted to up my editing skills and try to do something a bit longer and a little more in depth, do a little more planning around my videos. So hopefully this marks a uptick in quality on my channel, or maybe this is shit and I don't know it, in which case, still learning and growing. But I appreciate you guys taking the time out here to watch my video, and y'all take it easy.